Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Today's Sunday. Today's our Sunday Takeaways show. For those of you that have never really been with us in the past, this is kind of free-flowing consciousness based on what I watched yesterday. Granted, there are some games that go on that I don't always get to see. I was calling Clemson and Georgia yesterday, noon on ABC. Up against it was Penn State, West Virginia. So in a normal setting, I wouldn't necessarily be able to break that game down, but because of the weather delay, it allowed me the opportunity to actually watch quite a bit of that game. So we will break down as much as we can. We're not going to dive deep in the weeds. You'll have to check back with us tomorrow when we have a little more time to further review the tape and look at some trends and better kind of assess what actually went down after 24 hours of thought. So check back with us tomorrow. We'll have a more comprehensive breakdown on some of these games and some more takeaways that we usually have. Let's start chronological order with the Georgia Bulldogs, number one team in the country. My goodness, did they prove it there in the second half of that football game. First half, Clemson battled. Clemson battled the entire first half. They couldn't really get much going on the run game. Georgia couldn't. They couldn't get a whole lot going down the field. It felt like there really wasn't a lot for them. They kept getting behind the sticks, which was very, very out of character for Georgia. Last year, Georgia, do you realize that Georgia's average line to gain on third down last year was third down and 5.7 yards? That was the best in the country. Well, they lived in like 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12 for much of the first half yesterday. They only had 44 third down attempts all of last year that were 8 yards or more to go. So they were already kind of way off schedule. I thought there were some things that they'd love to clean up. There were a couple of throws that were just the tiniest bit off. I'm not talking like a lot. I'm talking just the tiniest bit off, like a throw behind Lovett that could have broke the game open. But I thought Carson Beck was rock solid in his first game of the year. I think the receivers are extremely athletic. This is a different Georgia team. I think they're faster than they were a year ago. I think they are more athletic than they were a year ago. They're not as much of a nightmare to cover, for example, because there's no Brock Bowers. But I do think their explosiveness was very much on display. On the other side, I like what I saw from their defense the whole day. I really do. I still think the secondary has question marks. There were a lot of Clemson receivers that were open, more on Clemson in just a minute, but they just couldn't quite get it done. So I do think the secondary will be something to watch against teams that are more efficient throwing the ball downfield. Moving over to Clemson. I know people are going to overreact. I've already seen stuff this morning about how Clemson's day is done and Clemson can't compete. I just want to remind everybody that in that exact same game, the Aflac kickoff game in Atlanta 2 years ago, Oregon got absolutely steamrolled, and Bo Nix looked like the Auburn version of Bo Nix. Just want to remind everybody of that. And Bo Nix, I think, is starting for the Denver Broncos next week. I also believe that he was drafted 12th overall, and I also believe that Oregon, since that game, has been pretty dang good, right? So I don't want to overreact and just put the knife into Clemson at this moment, but they got to get better play at quarterback. It's simple as that. It's as simple as that. They got to get better play at quarterback. I think their defense is still excellent. I think their defense battled as best they could. They just couldn't keep up as the game kind of started to get sideways there in the end. Cade Klubnik has to be better. He's got to be more accurate. He's got to hit some downfield throws. This whole dink and dunk, sideline to sideline stuff, it just doesn't work in the SEC and the ACC. Like, you have to push the ball downfield. And against Georgia, you're not going to be able to just nickel and dime your way down the field. You have to get chunk yardage. They couldn't, and that's why things got sideways. But there were opportunities there to hit wide receivers that were behind the defense. So I don't think Clemson's done at all. I still think they're prime position to be a contender in the ACC, but I think they have a lot of work to do, especially on the offensive side of the football. Let's go next to the Penn State West Virginia game, which was at the exact same time. And like I said, normally wouldn't get a chance to watch this game, but thank goodness for September and late August showers that allowed us to watch some more games. I thought Penn State, and look, West Virginia was overmatched from a personnel standpoint. That was pretty much it. Thought the home field might keep them in it. Thought they'd actually probably have a little more efficiency running the football, but I digress. What I wanted to see from Penn State was an explosive offense, the emergence of a number one wide receiver. Harrison Wallace appears to be that. There was some deep shots taken. There were some deep shots completed. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, Andy Kotelnicki has been the answer. I don't know that yet, but I think that for week one, it was an excellent start. I don't know if looking at kind of other places and other teams, that was a really convincing victory against a team that won 9 games last year, against a team that has a clear and established identity with veteran playmakers. And Penn State was having none of it. I thought Drew Aller looked pretty comfortable. I thought there were things to like about really both sides of the ball in that performance. And frankly, to have a weather delay like they had and to come out after the weather delay and play the way they did says a lot about the team's mental makeup as well. So Penn State, thought it was a very, very good performance. Let's go next to, I think, the performance of the day. And we have friends that slip from the chalice of supremacy and we never know what's in it. I'll tell you what's in mine. It's coffee. This is Sunday morning. I stayed up late watching Tetro McMillan, and I just need a little coffee. Really hot. Should not have drank that much. Anyways, I digress. Miami, I'm not going to sit here and anoint them the greatest thing ever. I'm not going to do that just yet. But there's a couple takeaways from this game. One, we tried to tell you. We tried to tell you that this team is ridiculous. Now, what I was most impressed with was not their playmaking ability, because we knew they had that, right? What I was most impressed with was the few mistakes that were made in the game. Usually it felt like week one, Miami last year, and look, they looked like a well-oiled machine last year against Texas A&M. Remember, that was week 2, I believe. And they looked great in that game. So we've seen them look really good in the beginning of the year. But man, with Cam Ward at quarterback, they're very, very different. I mean, the way he can move and flip his hips. I mean, the touchdown that he made, that he threw rolling to his left and back across his body, the touchdown that he threw at the end of the half, like, we're talking about pinpoint accuracy that was on display. And I'm not an NFL draft guru. Okay, I'm not like an NFL draft analyst. I don't do mock drafts. It's not really my thing. I don't think there was a quarterback in the country that improved their draft stock more in one game than Cam Ward did yesterday. That was a clinic. It wasn't flawless, but it was really, really, really good. The weapons that they have, awesome. I love the way that they're distributing to the receivers. Like, we all knew about Restrepo, but they got way more guys. They're even getting the tight ends involved early in the game. So really just a really outstanding performance. I mean, Tyler Barron, Damian Martinez, guys from the portal transferring in that looked like they'd been there for years. I mean, really comfortable. The one concerning thing was Ruben Bain getting a little banged up, and that's something that we'll have to monitor and watch. But that was about as good of a start as you could possibly want. And those that were kind of leaning towards taking Florida, I don't think this is a referendum on Florida in the future. I think Miami's a top 10 team. It's as simple as that. Florida is about a 6-7 win team. I really still think that they can get to that mark. I just think that Florida is not as talented as Miami, and they're also not as veteran as Miami. Think about how many snaps Cam Ward has played. Think about how many snaps Damian Martinez has played. I know Montrell Johnson and Graham Mertz have played a lot of snaps as well. But think about some of the difference makers. Mish Powell had an interception, the transfer from Washington. Think about how many snaps collectively have been played in college football by the Miami team, maybe not all together, but in other places, versus what you saw from the Florida Gators, who still are relatively young. And I do think that there's things to like about what I saw. The DJ Lego looked pretty good. I still think Graham Mertz is the guy. I still think he's your guy moving forward, at least at this moment. I thought there were some nice answers, like the run by Montrell Johnson. I've never seen him look that fast. The guy has never been a huge home run hitting back. but I thought there were some positives to be taken from that. I just think they ran into a buzzsaw against a team that has elite talent. And I think those that are killing Florida right now are not fully aware of just how talented Miami is. I still think Florida can win games. I still think Florida can get to a bowl. I still think Billy Napier has a chance to be the coach for the Gators in 25. But I know that those are not popular sentiments right now. My takeaway from that game yesterday was not how bad Florida is and what an atrocious job they've done rebuilding the roster. I don't see it that way. My takeaway from that game is that Miami is a playoff contender, by far the best team in week one, based on what I saw in the ACC, and a team that is going to be a huge problem for every single team they play. And that includes the likes of Georgia. That includes the likes of Ohio State. If Miami can stay healthy, they can beat those teams. I mean, this could be a team that we're talking about as a possible national championship contender. Compared to Texas last year, I think they're a lot more like Texas after seeing them week one than I might have even thought in the preseason. So this team's, they're legit now. Let's go to the nightcap. A&M and Notre Dame. It was not, if offense is your thing, it was not your game. But I really liked how physical the game was. Like, you don't have to have, to me, it doesn't have to be a track meet to be entertaining. It was a pitcher's duel. It was a slugfest. It was kind of exactly, if you listened to our breakdown last week, like low scoring, slugfest, crazy physical. It was kind of everything we thought it would be. I was thoroughly impressed with both defensive lines. I was thoroughly impressed with Notre Dame's secondary, which continues to be elite. The coverage at times, they were playing a lot of zone early in the game, and then they were like, all right, enough of this. Played a little more man as the game went along, or so it seemed, and the windows got a little tighter, and that's when things got more challenging for Connor Wigman. I was pretty impressed with what I saw from Notre Dame's offensive line. All things considered, it wasn't a flawless performance by any stretch of the imagination, but we have long talked all off season about how good Texas A&M's defensive front will be. I think that's a super, super talented group. And I thought Notre Dame battled. We said Notre Dame's offensive line, let's be real, they're a huge liability. That's what we said. And that's what we thought coming in. They'd lost Charles Jagasaw. They lost their two tackles from last year. Their center transferred out. Like we had said, I think that Notre Dame's offensive line is something that I would be concerned about if I were Marcus Freeman. I'm not saying that that's a group that's going to just single-handedly win them games like they have in the past. But I do think that's a group that won't be as much of a headache for the Irish as I originally anticipated. I was pretty impressed with what I saw from the wide receiver group at times. I'm not saying throughout the course of the game, but at times I was pretty impressed with that group because I think Texas A&M in the secondary is pretty solid. And I thought that there were some nice plays made by that group, and that group has long been a question mark, and I guess you could say a moderate concern. As far as Riley Leonard's play, it's week one. It's a tough defense that you're playing against. I don't think that they were going to be in crazy, we need to be aggressive mode. Why would you be? Your defense is pitching to shut out. Just keep the ball in play and just survive and advance. I thought it was a pretty conservative performance offensively, but I think there's more in the tank there for Notre Dame. I really believe that. They just didn't want to lose the game by making a critical mistake that could lead to an easy score for A&M that could flip the game on its head. But all things considered, I thought it was a really solid game from Notre Dame. I think they should feel good about what they did in the fourth quarter. I think they should feel good about what they did offensively in the second half. I think there was a lot of things to like with their adjustments. As far as A&M is concerned, I think this is a team that nobody's going to want to play this year. I think they're going to be super blue collar. I still think I'd like to see a little more from the wide receivers. Granted, I think they were going against an elite secondary. I'd like to see a little more from Wigman. I didn't think that he had his best stuff by any stretch. I didn't think he was bad by any sense of the word, but I do think that there were a few throws that I think he would like to have had back that could have potentially altered how that game finished up. So not a great performance offensively from A&M whatsoever, but I do think that there's room to grow on that side of the ball. It's the first game working with Colin Klein, first game with a lot of new players. It's understandable going against a defense that's that good that there are going to be some growing pains there. So certainly not going to lose a lot of sleep over that at the moment. Other teams in the top 10 that I thought looked excellent. Texas, totally dominant performance. Guilty pleasure. I was more excited about what I was going to see from Arch Manning at the end of the game than what I was going to see from the rest of the roster. I'm just going to be real. Like, I didn't anticipate learning a lot about Texas in week one. I wanted to see the receivers. I kind of wanted to see, all right, how does Quinn look? All that other stuff. But a game against Colorado State isn't going to make me feel better or worse about Texas going into the game against Michigan next week. It just wasn't. But I was really interested to see what Arch is going to do. I thought he looked really solid. Of course, went 5 of 6, had a couple touchdowns. So it looks like Texas is not just in good hands at the quarterback spot this year, but for the foreseeable future with the progress that's been made by Arch Manning. Let's go to Michigan. That's Texas's opponent next week. Did you guys have Davis Warren as the potential starter? Because I didn't. I had heard he was having a good camp. I just thought Alex Orji would get the first crack at it. I thought maybe there'd be a situation where Davis Warren would get some reps. Maybe they'd play 2. I was just surprised that it wasn't Orji who took the first snap. But then I watched Orji play. I saw Orji make a couple throws, one in which that he threw right into the ground on the move to his right that landed about 6 yards short of the wide receiver. And I thought, okay, that makes sense now. Like Alex Orji, while insanely difficult to defend, I still think is nowhere near where he needs to be as a thrower based on a couple attempts last night to be the every down player for the Wolverines. So I had heard maybe he was doing better in that area, but looked like yesterday maybe that praise that I was hearing about was slightly overstated. I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over the fact that Michigan struggled with a team like Fresno there. Didn't look great in the first half of the football game, up barely at halftime, because I have one, a ton of respect for Fresno, always have. And 2, I've always felt like Michigan is a program that gets better as the season goes along. And 3, they play Texas next week. Like, they're going to be fine. We'll break down Michigan. We'll break down Texas all week. Not going to panic about maybe a slow start because they weren't the only ones. There were a bunch of teams that had slow starts. I thought Ohio State had a bit of a slow start, even though it wasn't, obviously they won 52-3 or whatever it ended up being, but a bit of a slow start there. So that wasn't something I'd be a whole concerned about. I thought Oregon had a real slow start. We'll break that game down. I did not think they looked good. Compared to what I thought they were going to be, I did not think they looked great whatsoever. Credit to Idaho. They went in there and played their tail off. But Oregon, just not a ton of rhythm. Didn't look great on defense. Didn't look great on offense. Just kind of a sloppy and lackluster performance. But a lot of the time, like I said, a lot of times these guys, they've only played together, first game together. It's understandable. Well-oiled machines, Ole Miss, amazing. Alabama, wow. My goodness, that was really impressive. Now, TJ Finley, the quarterback for Western Kentucky, not really known as a great decision maker in his career, whether it be at LSU or at Auburn or at Texas State and now at Western Kentucky. Not the best decision maker, but the interceptions that Alabama created last night, Keon Sabb had 2 picks in the first quarter. It has to have you feeling pretty good if you're a Tide fan. Like that new defense where they're altering the technique and they're going to be playing more zone and eyes more on the quarterback. And while you might give up some cheap completions, the big plays defensively, sacks, interceptions, are going to increase. So maybe you give a little in hopes to get a lot back. And they got a lot back last night. Shutout performance, shutout victory. Bama 63-0 over Western Kentucky. A proud program, but one that got sideways. I thought Tennessee looked fantastic on both sides of the ball against Chat. I don't know. Tennessee Chat, I don't know how good they are. I don't think they're very good, but still like to look like that as opposed to just letting teams kind of hang around. Kansas State looked very solid, convincing victory. And then as far as some individual takeaways, Dylan Raiola Wanted to watch him. Thought he looked super comfortable. Being able to develop that rapport already with Isaiah Nayor was impressive. So I was really encouraged with that. And, I think obviously we know that things are going to ramp up for Raiola, and it'll be more challenging next week against Colorado than it was this week. All that is true. But for a true freshman, man, with that kind of expectations, you got to think the weight of the world's on his shoulders. I mean, the hopes and dreams of Nebraska football are on that young man's shoulders. I thought he took it in stride, looked super comfortable, and looked very solid. Look forward to seeing what he does next week against improved competition. Ashton Jeanty, ridiculous. Did you guys see the stat line for Ashton Jeanty? Now, I am a little concerned about Boise on defense. A little bit. I am a little concerned there. But I do think that going on the road to Georgia Southern is not the easiest trip in the world. But when you're running back, a guy that went 20 carries for 267 and 6 touchdowns, you heard that right. That's like video game numbers. 20 for 267 and 6 touchdowns. That's pretty good. I actually saw that was the first player to run for 250 and 6 scores in the game since Pittsburgh's Izzy Abanikanda back in 2022, which I thought was funny because I was like, there's no way that a performance like that has happened recently, and it was only 2 years ago. Sorry, Izzy Abanikanda. I apologize. I should have remembered your performance back in 22. And then lastly, Tet McMillan, Arizona's wide receiver. If you didn't stay up late for this one, you missed a clinic. He started out with some big plays early down the right side. I mean, it was like, this guy is uncoverable. He looked faster to me than he looked at times last year. And while we're not going to lose a lot of, not going to freak out because he just torched the 85 Bears, New Mexico is not that. But when you go 10 for 304 and 4 touchdowns, you got people's attention. So that kind of sums up where we're at. If we missed your game, your team, check back with us tomorrow. Upon further review is what we'll kind of term tomorrow's show as, because this is just streaming consciousness. This is what I saw yesterday, the notes that I took down yesterday. But now it's going to be a deep dive here on a Sunday afternoon. And really late Sunday morning after church, I'm diving into the tape. So check back with us tomorrow. We'll have more takeaways, and we'll give you our top 10 things that we learned from week 1. So for all of us here at Always College Football, thanks for being with us. Thanks for sharing my Sunday morning coffee. We'll see you tomorrow. It's Always College Football.
Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.